Majesty the King and His Majesty the 4th Gyelpo are both on royal tours to different parts of southern Bhutan to encourage the people and motivate them to remain resilient as Bhutan continues to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. His Majesty the King arrived in Jomozangkha today. His Majesty met with the Druk COVID-19 task force and other officials. His Majesty is accompanied by His Royal Highness the Gyelpo, the Prime Minister and Chairperson of National Council.
En route, His Majesty granted audiences to students of Karmaling School and the Druk COVID-19 task force members in Samdrucholing and visited the Gyelpo Center site in Pemaling. Yesterday in Samdruzonkar, His Majesty granted an audience to the Eastern COVID-19 task force and Samdruzonkar task force. The team presented an update of the situation and measures in place to address COVID-19 and related issues. His Majesty visited the Thomde control room, which monitors border movement, as well as Samdruzonkar main gate and various points of entries into the country, which are being patrolled by armed forces personnel, volunteers from government agencies and desups. His Majesty also visited Motanga, which is the identified location for a mini dry port to hold import goods. His Majesty expressed appreciation to the frontline workers for their hard work and endurance while working to combat COVID-19 successfully and encouraged them to remain alert and resilient. His Majesty the King granted audiences to the task force members of Mongar and Tashigang and met with the students of Sheriff's College and Gebijing College of Information Technology earlier this week. His Majesty also granted an audience to the students of Jimmy Namgyal Engineering College at Deothang. His Majesty said to the students that being perceptive about the future and working accordingly will ensure success as individuals and as a nation. His Majesty the 4th Druk Gyelpo visited Tsirang and Gyelpo as part of a special royal tour. His Majesty is accompanied by His Royal Highness Prince Jigel Ugen Wangchuk. His Majesty the 4th Druk Gyelpo expressed appreciation to the frontline workers for their hard work so far. His Majesty granted audiences to desups, armed forces personnel, COVID-19 task force and students of Gyelpo High School earlier this week.
Misiki kidu da kompege lasu shungi kage dada sigo nida dobe machara somba me somba soe na me sami tap ma do bom ten toy kebela do chi bo se machara tashe baso machara na dulu domboli na le o ma supletendi veki nigera mi ton sa ngap ti de chi machara na dulu la ja se ya de boda ni la na ni ki kente de Machara gap da shunlu kobi. Te dele chi ga khable chi mi ton sa gude chi la byande be chi ga khable na woi misle la na go. Ane boda yisu khara duge ga ba gi matu tuppe machara duge mi se la mi misulu la na ni. Machara somba kidu da tap deu ma do kemisulu kidu sigi. Machara sanam pasulu tap deu mado chomba sen onwe matutu ke dandi jeli te machara khache shudi che pusta pumsume ina gomma shuwa yebe de kapsula chelula bi machara name sami lacha gendibe so khatuk de la benidira che pusta pumsu ikablu machara duke akabde name sami dingdi regime katoto kitoto chegi zono chegi labi pari bulu ino de sheri chuo inte habdi
While in Gyelpo, His Majesty also visited the Gyelpo town, hospital, the identified mini dry port and the Gyelsum training center site in Tarethang.
I got some kind of peace in my mind and me and my attendant literally cried out of happiness for the first time in my life. I guess same goes to her also. And for me, it was seriously a blessing in disguise.
In Tsirang, His Majesty visited the hospital and town. His Majesty the King and His Majesty the 4th Druk Gyelpo are both deeply concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on the people, especially those at high-risk areas.
COVID-19 giving a chigara jadu chap tap ani vidida dugil shibana ngachina jin kolub zangbo this now be middle na mi sam guys shuni la the dugil shibana jindu sit goila dida ngachila anzumbe gokap thop sino sara matala no satami di an gokap thomi di ngare misichin namya mijisno mila ngare nam sam nam chidus no vidale fabiru duke khablo cha matu peshuni gi no sa yis shudola
dare na wanya khaida tangachara coronavirus ki benya khai bedalu sago anzum china jinbe ngachi khalu sonde na bedalu thonong gre shai so chin wai na misum kyo zanu sela te timbule fa du ani boda mapale jinigi gokobya na misum kensu chinila te dare na jebo dalu ro seme na misum jegi jedra ngachilu gedwe song tere ngachi la disu bimegwe namsing yara yuse nanzame songbodo dangachi nalfa bedre berula la di matutube timo shobe gyakhabda majra mise to sungi denle kade dada chajuni se nosan zomchi twin se chunil
Tandan Fanso, BBS News.